Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode in the Qumulus Solutions webinar cybersecurity series. My name is Kyle Johnson. I'm the Director of Security Operations and Risk Management for Qumulus. And we also have Brian Mans, who is our Senior Information Security Engineer, and he's going to be leading today's webinar. And it's really going to be talking about why you need a layered security approach when building your information security program and having that strong cybersecurity posture. So it's going to switch it up a little bit, but it's really along the same lines of what Qumulus does. And for those of you that don't know what Qumulus does, we are a cybersecurity consulting firm that really provides organizations with access to the people, expertise, and technologies they need to assist them in reviewing and developing their cybersecurity program. As you can see on the screen, we offer a wide variety of services, including our cybersecurity controls and risk assessment, which will really identify the gaps that Brian's going to be talking about, the pieces that you actually need in an organization to stop certain attacks and putting that actually into play. We also offer policy development, some virtual CISO services, and Brian heads up our vulnerability management program that really can tie into understanding what is on your network and being able to identify those assets that may be vulnerable to certain attacks and different malware that Brian's going to speak of. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to Brian and kick it off into the types of malware.
Thanks, Kyle. Types of malware. We're getting into different types, and you can find all sorts of websites that take you and tell you different types of malware. We chose to use CrowdStrike's, where they define it as a malicious piece of software that enables unauthorized access to networks for the purpose of theft and sabotage or espionage. Now, is that always the case? I think adware is maybe one of the ones that just wanted to put pop-ups in front of you. If you remember back in the day when you get 1,000 pop-ups when you clicked on one website, that type of adware. But we'll start with ransomware. Ransomware is something that, most people know it as it encrypts the data and then doesn't release it until you're paid. Now, this has evolved a little bit because ransomware not only encrypts it, but if you don't pay, we're going to release your information. So at that point, you're looking at a breach when they exfiltrate your data outside of your network. That is the definition of a breach. Some real world examples: SamSam, WannaCry. WannaCry was big. SamSam was probably one of the more nastier, I would say. Used different methods. Some of it was JSON vulnerabilities. It did evolve into RDP, and yours truly has a little experience with SamSam at a former organization where we had to do battle. And I'm going to tell you, not an easy thing. But, once you go through the process of, hopefully you've never had to, but understanding the process that your data gets encrypted, you either pay it or you don't. Prefer that you don't. Hopefully you got a backup that you can restore. One of the great experiences I had, and you're going to say, tapes, who uses tapes? Most people are going to use disk to disk. But understand, piece of malware like SamSam not only attacked this organization's files, but it went after backups. Any backup file or something that said backup, it would delete it. And it attacked what I believe the software was Semantic Backup Exec. So it encrypted the files that are on the backup. So in order to start the process of restoring items, you had to restore the backup system itself. So think about these things when you're putting in backups. Now, the best practice, and this was shortly after dealing with that a few years or 4 years ago, that we saw that, do you really want that backup system joined to your network or Active Directory system? So now you may discover that people are saying, hey, don't join your backup. Only use the service account to be able to do the backups. Fileless malware. Hard to be able to detect when they're using native OS commands, such as PowerShell, or SamSam is one of those semi-fileless, as it says. Notice SamSam's in a couple of these. So kind of a hybrid piece of ransomware, because when I use it, we discovered that it was more of a PS exec. They used sysinternal files to be able to distribute once they got the admin credentials. Spyware, pretty self-explanatory. It's going to collect information without you knowing. Not really going to give away, hey, I'm on here. Just maybe your machine's slow, that type of thing. Trojans, or RAT, remote access Trojan. This is where the money's made. You'll see combinations of malware when you discover there'll be Emotet this and maybe another that delivers the payload. But Emotet's kind of the Trojan that gets you that beachfront or a beachhead so that you can continue the attack on the network. Worms. If you hear the word worms, it's wormable. That is the worst case scenario, because all it has to do is be executed by one machine, one user, and any machine that has that vulnerability, it now has this infection. So boom, click, and within a couple hours, 3 hours, your whole network is down. Worst case scenario. So whenever you hear the word wormable, understand that you need to get on and patch whatever you got to do for that vulnerability. Rootkits. Malware gives remote control of victim's device, low level, such as firmware. So you're looking at not necessarily patching the operating system, but getting in there and getting your firmware updates because they will go after them. Some of the more famous real world examples: Blue Pills, Sony, BMG, Rootkit, bots, or keyloggers, sorry, skip one. Monitors users' keystrokes, kind of low level. Usually these comes in the form of Java, and will take your credit card information, maybe passwords or whatever else that you may be typing at that point, and then uploading it and using it against you, such as using it on your emails, using on the organization you work for, or any other personal things such as accounts, such as Netflix, banking accounts, those types of things. Bots goes way back. They were used in the early 2000s to send all those spam campaigns so that when you saw these unsolicited emails such as Viagra ads, all these little emails, solicitations to send them, and they got paid to do so. And what is a bot network? It's basically a bunch of machines that are infected, that are at the control of an attacker. And what they do is they put it on the dark web and say, hey, I've got a botnet, and I'll allow you to use it to do spam campaigns, DDoS, or phishing, sending out malware. Mobile malware affects mobile devices. Triada is one of them. You don't see a whole lot of them. Android devices are more prone to infections, more so. Not that iOS won't catch up. As you know, iOS is a little bit more of a more popular device, so it will catch up. Attackers are going to go at people or at devices that are more popular. So if Android's the most popular device, that's the one they're going to pick on. Now for today's malware. This is where it gets interesting. And, when you do your research out there on malware, you discover that you're not dealing with, a virus from 20 years ago that just rebooted your machine and constantly put it into a reboot cycle. These guys have a process, a developer process that they do to make these bypass your antivirus. Polymorphic malware, which Emotet can fit into. Frequently, it changes its identifier characters, such as file name. Now, we know most viruses will change their name, but it also changes the encryption and variable keys. So that makes it harder for signature-based antiviruses to pick it up. Mutation engines. Now, you'll hear the word mutation engines. What that does is helps change the signature. So every time it's deployed, it's a new instance. So true or false is this Emotet coming into your network? Well, if it's constantly changing the signature, how can your antivirus or malware provider protection keep up with that. It's almost an impossible task. Now, Emotet can act as a worm, and I have seen Emotet in the wild, and it spread like a worm, and it was all over the network. Once somebody clicked on it, boom. What does Emotet kind of do? It looks to use anti-evasion such as sandbox detection. It looks for sandbox. So anti-evasion in terms of a sandbox, it may just say, you know what, I'm going to wait a certain period of time, or I'm going to wait for a predetermined amount of mouse clicks to avoid that sandbox detection. And once I'm home free, then I'm going to deliver that type of thing. VM detection. It looks to see if am I on a VMware host? You know, is the tools installed? And as I said, it changes the signature every single time it's deployed. When you get that, I mean, think every single time that is deployed. So I deployed to this company, and within a week, I deployed to that company. Two totally different signatures. Armored malware, which is one I'm like, what is armored malware? I've never really heard of that. But it basically wraps itself in code and hides its characteristics by deploying some tactics such as anti-disassemblers, debuggers, anti-heuristics, anti-emulation, kind of the same thing along, sandbox, those types of things. It waits a predetermined time, and then it packages itself so that it's not really the payload, the virus isn't the thing you download. And then it kind of goes back and waits and then deploys itself and does a routine. And when we get into metamorphic, kind of what it does. But some of the anti-tracing, according to Black Hat, has crashed the operating system. So be wary of that. Example, whale virus. Metamorphic, which is kind of where you start to realize that there is a process to this. And understand, from the time that I researched all these different types of malware, these can be placed in together. Polymorphic to be mixing armored malware process, metamorphic to the polymorphic, and they can kind of blend themselves together. Metamorphic malware contains an encrypted payload and uses a virus decryption routine. This is the process to execute its intended function. When it propagates, it basically generates a new key. So once again, we're getting into that whole signature encryption, and only stays the same is the virus decryption routine. This particular is kind of a dead giveaway. If you can't figure out, if your endpoint protection firewall cannot figure it out during this, when it's downloaded, the virus decryption routine, then it's not going to be able to identify it. Why do I say that? Because it uses a mutation engine and a virus decryption routine to completely change itself. So it bears no resemblance to itself deployed over here, deployed over there. It's going to change. And that is interesting. So think about that. Your antivirus, let's say you have, and in IT, we know that there's some antivirus, oh, hey, this machine here isn't working. Well, what if that machine wasn't working when it needed a signature update, and you have one of these guys being deployed? It's kind of almost a lose situation for antivirus and endpoint protection. I can't imagine the work that it takes to get those endpoint protections to be able to protect against these. Okay. So now into network firewalls. How do they bypass these things? Well, phishing seems to be a pretty good way. Most, and I've dealt with firewalls for quite some time. I never put my trust into the spam filtering of UTM firewalls, such as a SonicWall or maybe a Sophos. You always go out and try to get the third party, and yet still spam gets through those. Well, guess what? It didn't have to work so hard to get past your network firewall. Social engineering. I'm not even going to use technology. I'm just going to try to social engineer. Hey, this is so-and-so at the administration office, and I need your password. Or I'm an IT person calling. Exposed services. One of the things you can do is go out there and look, and what services do I have? There's plenty of websites out there that will help you scan your website and see what's open. You may find something that was misconfigured. I'll give you a perfect example. Somebody changes an IP on a controller, and it controls your wireless, and it happens to be open to the world at this point because there was an old firewall setting in there that pointed everything to this one particular IP address. Always look for those exposed services, vulnerable web servers. Keep them up to date. Register for, let's say, if you have a Joomla, WordPress, or Drupal web server, register to those services so that you can see when there's updates needed for your version of Drupal. Management protocols. If I had a dime for every time I've seen an open management protocol on a firewall, I'm telling you what, I probably wouldn't be doing a webinar. I'd be rich and living in Florida right now. But I've seen so many management protocols such as what? RDP, SSH, those types. And, I hate to tell you this, but I have seen Telnet open, and I'm like, why? So you don't want those things open, okay? Because what are you going to attack? SSH, my thought process when I see SSH, more than likely it doesn't have a lockout policy. And I'm going to see if I can get in there and try to pivot from that point. RDP, I'd rather have a GUI. I mean, it's a lot easier so that you understand when you expose those to external, to the internet, that people are going to come at them. Configuration errors, we all make them. I've made them. And even that one know-it-all IT person makes them. We all do. Is deep packet inspection enabled? And the reason I ask that, because if you don't look at the encryption, remember the malware that we just talked about? They're all encrypted. How do you know what's inside that encrypted file? Most firewalls just send that through because, hey, I don't need to inspect it because I didn't configure it. Is web management exposed internally? Now, that would be to your firewall. And once again, there are many organizations out there that have exposed management portals. What can I do with that? Well, I'm going to tell you, your firewall is not attached to any lockout policy either. Hopefully, it came configured, because I know some that will put that in there, but did you configure it? Configuration there, see? Piggyback off VPNs, personal devices on your network. If you work in healthcare, and I did many moons ago, that was a struggle because doctors would like to work on the personal devices, or administration wouldn't buy them any laptops, and doctors do work a lot of hours. Are vendors connected to your VPN? Dealing with SIM, we discovered a lot of vendors coming through VPNs and oddball traffic coming from them. And it was always a battle trying to get, well, I have nothing on my machine. Why is it going out to a Tor network? So understand that anybody you allow access to your network and you don't have control over that device, understand that that's a huge risk, because you don't know the state of their machines. You don't know the state of their antivirus. You don't know the state of somebody's personal device, right? Attack exposed clients. Now you're getting into the cloud base now. And, if you got a hardened firewall, you got good practices going on through your machines, they're all hardened, and you've got cloud services such maybe as an Office 365, you don't have multi-factor enabled, and I get your password. Well, if I get your password, let's pick on Office 365. Well, guess what I have access to now is OneDrive. And if I can get you to click on that file, and next thing you know, your whole Office 365 will be suspected. You could send an email out to everyone within the organization, or it could encrypt everything that's on your OneDrive, and maybe to your SharePoint sites if you're using Office 365. Firewall vulnerabilities. Now, I know from personal experience that when we talk firmware vulnerabilities, I always try to stay one behind. But in today's world, it's changing so fast. Can you? You got to ask yourself that. I mean, what kind of vulnerabilities? When you get those emails from your firewall vendor saying, hey, this brand new firmware is out, look at the notes and see what vulnerabilities that they're talking about. And is it something, is it an acceptable risk, or is it something, hey, we have to update this to the newest? I don't want to update to the newest firmware because we know what happens when we do. Sometimes that brings more problems than good, right? SneakerNet, a slang term for meaning of USB sticks, external drives, and personal devices. Are people bringing in their own personal USB drives, external hard drives, personal devices? How do you know that they don't have viruses on them? Whose machine did they put them in? Where have they been? Those are the types of things that can definitely bypass your network firewalls. Laptops, home networks. Who is using the laptops? Huge point here in terms of where we're at this time in terms of the pandemic. Everybody's working remotely. Who's sitting on that machine? I trust my kid not to do something stupid, but all it takes is one click and, hey, let's go to this website. And I Googled it. And next thing you know, I just infected my parents' machine. And now if that's your work laptop, your whole network is going to have it, right? Next on to endpoint protection. Today's endpoints, there's all kinds of endpoint protections out there. There's anti-evasion. There's, next generation. There's a lot of them that still have signature base, and you should. Is signature dead? I mean, most part people think so, but you're still going to need that type of protection. Email protection doesn't protect against email. Web browsers, application control. One of my favorite thought processes when I'm looking at endpoint is I would love to have application whitelisting so that you can block everything. You don't get to run this. You don't get to run this. You only get to run what I say that you can run. Exploit protection, data loss protection. Is it lifting data? Do you see large amounts of data coming off of your laptop or servers? Incident investigation. If you have an incident investigation in your endpoint protection, think about that for a second. What are they telling you right there? They're telling you, while we are good, we are not 100% at blocking everything. So if you have a file that bypasses, such as one of those armored or polymorphic viruses, that right there is telling you that we are not 100%. And how can you when you're always on the reactive side of security? Technology is reactive. It's not proactive. So understand that. Understand that not every piece of endpoint protection is going to be able to block everything that's there. Can it block fileless attacks, living off the land, PowerShells, things like that? Sandbox evasion. Do you need it? Yeah. Can it be bypassed? Well, as I said previously, it delays on a predefined number of mouse clicks and will wait a certain amount of time. So sandbox evasion, while you do need it, can be bypassed. Compression. Once again, you're getting into that metamorphic, polymorphic, armored. Things are always changed. There's that mutation engine always changing, and compression is one of the things that they will use to bypass your endpoint protection. Encryption. Once again, metamorphic, polymorphic, they're all kind of starting to blend in because they will encrypt the file because it changes the way it looks to your system. And if your malware doesn't decrypt it, it's not going to know that's a virus. And if the signature's not been pushed down, it's going to let it go through. Memory injection. Now, the nice thing, and that's a pretty simple definition there. Basically, you find a spot in a piece of software and you inject your malicious code, and because it's a trusted process, it allows it to run. Make sure your endpoint protection can block memory injection. You don't want that. Now, are there some false positives when finding endpoint protection that blocks memory injection? Oh yeah, there will always be. Macros. For the love that is all that is holy. This is something that goes way back that Microsoft says, this is dangerous. And yet we still do it today. How do I know? Healthcare, when you sign that signature pad, that is a word macro that basically feeds back into a health information system. Had to set one up, and I see them all over the place when I go into the hospital or doctor's office. So they're there. Macros are always, and I wish they would get away from macros, but disable it. If you don't have the need for macros, disable it, control it, and do what you got to do. Download and droppers. Now, this is an interesting one because basically it's kind of like the scout. I'm going to check this area out, see what it is, kind of look, hey, is this a VMware machine? Do they have sandbox? Do they have these known artifacts within a machine to be able to say, am I being studied? Malware does not like to be studied. And if it detects that it's trying to be studied, such as VMware sandbox environment, it will not run. And in this case, what they're doing is they're scouting the area before they download the malicious code. On to how to defend. How to defend. Now, I will tell you, while this list is not complete, I could write this forever on different things that you should be doing. I mean, if you went and looked at a CIS hardening guide, you'll discover, wow, this is information overload in terms of, policies to set, registry settings to set, how to configure your firewall, those types of things. It's really interesting how many different things you can do, but these are some of the things I thought would take you down the right path. The first and number one thing I will tell you is your end users do not need administrative rights. If you have a piece of software that says, no, you need to have administrative rights. No, we'll figure it out. It's probably if you're working in the Windows world, it's some NTFS permissions. That's all you got to figure out and allow it to set. Now, does that make you worrisome? Yeah, because that doesn't seem very secure, right? What will limiting administrative rights? It limits an attacker's ability to perform additional tasks on an affected machine. Why? Because they don't have administrative access. So installing certain things and doing what they need to, it's not always as easy. They can't pull the information that they need. They may not be able to pivot onto the next machine. Passwords. Have long passwords, 14 characters per the CIS. It will increase the time significantly, and this changes daily. Today, we have passwords. Maybe tomorrow we won't have passwords. But if we do have passwords, it may be in another 2 years, it'll be 28 characters that they're recommending, and who can remember that? But it will limit the ability to perform brute force and dictionary attacks. Dictionary attack basically use a password list text file that goes through some of the weakest passwords, sometimes in the millions. Brute force is just go at it till you get it. And also you want to require complex passwords. And complex, according to Active Directory, is one of the 4 things, or 3 of the 4 things. It is uppercase, lowercase numbers, and special characters. Now, some people may not like that, but be careful. The longer you make it, sometimes you also have to audit folks because 14 characters, and if you make it complex, they may be writing them down. So always be sure to audit, make sure nobody's writing things down. Get into using password managers for users. Those help out tremendously. Endpoint protection. Verify all endpoints have protection. It is updated. That is an ongoing task to say that next week you won't have a problem with an endpoint and communicating back. No, my experience has always been it's always some machine that's causing issues. Have that endpoint protection set to notify you. Be able to understand that your network, I have a vulnerable machine, right? Research endpoint protection that prevents anti-evasion. Go out there and look for anti-evasion. Those are the kind of things. There's software out there that will do anti-evasion. What do I mean? It will basically says, hey, I am a VMware machine, even though it's a laptop or server, physical server. It will tell it, I have a debugger, so I can debug your malware. I have other things on there. I have a sandbox. I have all the things that says that you need in terms of we're trying to study you, so that the malware just sits there and does nothing. Now, that is that kind of all you need? No, you still need that signature. So you need a combination product to be able to do those types of things. Now, how would you look at your endpoint protection from an easier standpoint? Well, we go down to the next one, Security Information Event Management, or SIM, as it's deemed in cybersecurity. SIM basically takes everything from every device from your routers, firewalls, servers, laptops, desktops, you name it, and it tries to tell that story of what's going on. And SIM is like a piece of clay after dealing with it. And if you don't mold it to what you want it to tell you, it's just another piece of software sitting on your network. You need to build in threat intelligence with that so that you understand what malicious IPs are out there, right? And that takes threat intelligence from a community source. There are many out there. Research them and utilize the one that you feel most comfortable with. One of the other things I learned about SIM is GeoIP. You know, like I said, I've managed many firewalls, and we use GeoIP filter. Currently, I have most of the world blocked other than maybe one or two countries. And what they do, and what I discovered through SIM, is that they will relay off of some ISP services and come back at you. Some of the towns that I remember seeing, Chicago, LA, and New York, were one of the big ones. Not that there's not more out there, but those were one of the consistent ones that would pop up, and then you would do a who is and look them up and discover that some country, and they sometimes stated which country it was, who was managing it, and that you're like, oh, well, that's not good. And then you do your threat intelligence on that particular IP or URL, and you discover all kinds of malicious activity coming from it. Then you block it. That's the beauty of SIM, is being able to get in front of that bus that's trying to hit your organization and stop it. Microsoft macros, once again, I said disable it where feasible, because I know some of the organizations out there cannot do that, but where you can, disable it. So, like, let's say if where I worked, it was healthcare, and patient access was the area that took all the signatures. Well, if the back office, doctors, if they don't need that pen, to be able to have a user sign, disable those macros. You don't need them. Cyber security awareness training, as Kyle alluded to, we do cyber security awareness training. Train your organization users on the dangers of phishing websites. Because I will tell you, and I've stated this before at other organizations, if you're not phishing your users and teaching them the dangers, somebody will phish them, and it will be the ones that bring your organization to a halt. Okay, not trying to scare you. Those are just the facts. You see the emails, we all know about them. Hey, click here, I'm a prince over in this country, and I need your bank account information. And, next thing you know, you're getting ransomware. Patch management, one of my hot topics. It's an ongoing base. Implement a patch management solution that allows updates of OS third-party applications. And in today's world, I just got done talking about this probably an hour ago, and we're in a different world where we have a lot of remote workers currently. It has to be able to deal with the flux of ingoing and outgoing devices on your network, because it's no longer behind the protection of your network firewall anymore, right? So you have to be able to update them, especially in 2020. 2020, every month there's been about 100 some security updates, with March's SMB Ghost being exploited within less than a month. They had a proof of concept on GitHub in less than a month. The normal time is 0 to 45 days from the point of a discovery. So get your devices updated, constantly updated. And some things I always ask other IT people, because I was aggressive on updating, staying within a month of doing my updates, is would you rather have it down because of ransomware, or would you rather have it down because of a bad patch? For me, I would choose the latter. Multifactor authentication, where you can do it, budgets permitting. It allows, let's say an attacker gains access to your system. They get your credentials because they did a dictionary attack and you have a weak password. That additional authentication method is going to keep them out. Not that multi-factor can't be bypassed. Obviously, if you're on the machine, if the attacker sent you a phishing email and you clicked on it and you're already multi-factored into your Office 365. Well, obviously, they found a way around. Okay, so not that it's 100% proof, but I have seen pop-ups saying, "Hey, did you approve this?" I'm like, I'm not in Iran, so no. So you see people trying to gain that access. DNS filtering. Not that it's a best practice, but I believe this is an upcoming topic. Most organizations locally, I know, don't implement any type of DNS filtering, and I have used a DNS filtering, and it showed a ton of information, even helped identify malicious traffic from a particular machine. Now, there are many products out there, and they will help you get your organization, give it more visibility. One of the nice things too, when I utilize DNS filtering, is when I took a laptop outside of that network, that DNS filtering is still in place. So, and is DNS filtering a replacement for web filtering? You could say yes and no. Is DNS filtering easily bypassed? Yes. All you got to do is be able to change those properties of your network, and put in 1.1.1.1 or Google's DNS, and next thing you know, you've bypassed that. That's where limiting administrative rights, we go back over to the very first one. If your users can't manage it, then they can't change it. So it makes it a little bit harder for them to change that DNS IP setting. Okay. Vulnerability scans. Did you patch everything over in the patch management section? You need to find out, because here's the thing: if you're not constantly doing vulnerability scans, what is on your network currently? Do you have an inventory of everything that's on your network? Just because DHCP says, well, that's not on my device, did they configure a static IP address outside that range? Okay, so you have to understand what's on it and scanning all the time, because you never know when somebody's going to come and pop something on your network that could be malicious or not intending to be malicious, but their machine wasn't up to snuff and they clicked on something. Now they put it on your network, not intentionally trying to cause a breach, but now you have somebody on your network that has a suspicious machine. Isolate. One of the biggest things I see organizations not do is isolate. And what I mean is use that network segmentation. Most networks will have layer 3, layer 2 switches, and you can do some isolation in there where you say, well, you can't get here, but you can't get over here. And why is that a big thing to do? Because let's say Joe, over an accountant, let's say we're at a school and we have our accounting department over here. Well, one of the kids clicks on something, that network gets infected. If they don't have access to the accounting department, guess who doesn't get infected unless they go straight to the Active Directory, if you had an Active Directory. So it's going to be a little bit harder. It's that layered approach of security. We're putting something for you in place so that you can't just see what's everything on our network. And you make it harder, attackers like easy. Like IT admins, we like easy. We like to be able to do things the easy way because it makes our job easy, right? Isolate management protocols. And what does that mean? Well, if you're in a school, and I worked at schools for many years, RDP. How many times I've seen some kid trying to RDP into some of our servers? Yeah, because why? Because maybe there's an answer key out there that allows them to pass their classes, right? They're testing the boundaries of the network. SSH. Don't allow internal SSH to any part of the network other than an administrative network. You can set those up so that only your IT team on their IT VLAN can access them, okay? And then you get into isolation, a different type of isolation. And we've all seen this, especially in healthcare. Usually in healthcare, it's the radiology department because they're attached to that Windows XP or Windows 7 machine is attached to a $500,000 piece of machinery, if not more, and they can't update. Well, guess what? The best practice there would be to isolate that machine so it has no access to other than what it needs to be isolated to. And if you have a third party and they don't need access to any part of your network, isolate them, period. That reduces your risk. If they don't manage that machine properly, at least you don't have to worry about what it's going to do if they become infected. Isolate so it can't see any part of the network other than obtain the internet services that it needs. Harden, you've heard me say this before. Harden all your network infrastructure devices. Manufacturers' best security practices are out there. CIS benchmarking, and trust me, when you get into CIS benchmarking, that is a huge guide. Take your time, look at it. Not everything may apply to you, but look at it, and it will help guide you to harden your machine so that when you deploy a machine, that they're all hardened. And should you scan those machines? Yeah, you probably should. Make sure that something isn't misconfigured. And once again, we go back to configuration errors. It happens on laptops. It happens on firewalls. Hardening also will help reduce unneeded services. So many times out of the box, a printer, laptop, I'm open to everything. I've got Bonjour. I've got this print service. I've got this antiquated print service that you haven't even heard of. Well, it's just sitting there running on a printer, or it may be there's a service running on your laptop that you don't need, such as maybe you would discover that Bonjour is running on a laptop and a enterprise network. You don't need that, right? Enabling firewall devices. They talk about hardening. Make sure you have your firewall. Well, what about my network? Enterprise firewall. Well, once again, we get into the layers. You make it harder for an attacker to do the penetration or to pivot by putting on that shield, the firewall, so that they can only see, oh, this service is open, but that's about it. Well, that's going to be really tough. Well, let's move on to the next one. You see the logic there? Enable security lockout policies. If there's one thing you should do, and I've seen some organizations not have it, and I'm going to tell you that's very risky, because what's going to happen is they're going to just dictionary tag and brute force that web interface or SMB or SS, whatever protocol you can think that you can authenticate to, they're going to go after, and they're going to try to brute force dictionary tag it. So enable security lockout policies so that, let's say, Brian Manns over in IT is, he clicked on a link, and next thing you know, somebody's trying to get his password, and they're trying to beat it up, and instead of them allowing them to get that information, it will lock that account out, and then you see it lock out again, and then you see it lock out again, and you see it lock out again. Well, that's a good indication that there's something going on with that account. Now, I have seen where people have brought machines on 6 months after the fact because the laptop hadn't been seen. And of course, what happens? You have Active Directory cache credentials, and that machine logged in, never logged out. So what's that mean in 6 months is it's never been updated as well. Starts locking out this person's account because they had changed the password, but they hadn't changed the password on the machine. Machine loses its trust with AD, and you get into those situations where, like, oh man, is this, are we getting attacked? And you may find out, no, if I go into events, look for ID 4270, it'll tell me within an Active Directory that, I can go find that machine that's causing this issue, right? Firewalls. Reduce the attack surface by removing unneeded services, once again, exposed to the internet. Lock that down, that network enterprise firewall. Do you need SSH? Do you need to be able to manage that firewall from the internet? Do you need to allow a vendor, and I've seen this, do you need to have him have RDP? Because I'm going to tell you what, if you have SIM, like we've suggested over there on the left, you will see how many times that an RDP port, once it gets discovered on the internet, that it will be dictionary attacked or brute force attacked, and they're just going at it. And understand, they're looking at your email addresses, and they're pulling down those accounts to find that list of users, and then weak passwords out towards it. Unless you've been breached, then you may find out your credentials are already out there, and they may find that, download some passwords for your organization. DMZ, if you have websites, place them in that are internal on your network, so to speak, put them in the DMZ. don't use the port forward, because guess what happens if I get access to your website that you forgot to update, and I get in on it. Well, now I have access to your internal network, okay? DMZ or host that offsite, so that reduces the risk of your internal infrastructure being attacked, okay? And once again, I go back to the protocol. Don't do management protocols on the outside. Figure out, get yourself the VPN or some remote software that you trust, and go at it that route. We're not at the age anymore where we can allow management protocols. We used to be able to, oh, hey, I'm going to allow RDP for my home network, and I'm going to log in. No, that's not going to happen. And at the bare minimum, backup, backup, backup. And you have to always preach this, is always monitor and verify backups are being completed. Not all backup software is developed the same. Not all backup software works every day. So verify storage, verify space, verify errors. When you update, make sure your backups are constantly working, and then keep one off site. One of the things that I learned from previous issues that we've had is not only have a backup on site, but have that backup off site, whether it be tapes or an offsite off completely in a different state, so you can avoid the issues of, you know, let's say a tornado goes through and you're backing up off site, meaning, hey, I backed up to the admin office, which is a block through, and you have a catastrophic issue. Yeah, you see what I'm talking about going with there. Now, some of the other things that aren't mentioned here is incident response. Let's say that malware does get through. Well, be able to understand that incident response. And that's some of the things that Kyle and Jade will go through when we do a risk assessment, is get into that side of things, business continuity, disaster recovery, because when let's say that ransomware gets in there and your network is down, who do I restore first? Who do I restore second? And I will tell you that from my experience of not having an incident response from previous organizations, everybody comes at you, and they're all directors, and like, when's my data going to be restored? Understand that level, that may not be an IT decision, but that may be a higher administration decision of who do we restore first in case the worst case scenario happens. Like, I get that's an instant response, and I thank you guys for your time. If you guys do have any questions or interest in our services, you can contact us at info@qumulussolutions.com. I thank you again, and have a good week.